So we made it through verse 18 on Sunday, and I just want to remind us of where we are on that. David, of course, is still running from King Saul, and it says in verse 14 that he came into the hill country in the wilderness of Ziph, and then verse 15 mentions this same area, but gives us a little more precision on location, where it says the wilderness of Ziph at Horesh, and Jonathan is going to come and meet him there. And I'm only reminding us of this because in verse 19, the people of Ziph are going to feature prominently in this next story. But before we get into that, I want to start with a question. I want to hear about your thoughts, your perceptions of everything that we've been talking about in this transition in the life of Saul. What do you think? What's going on? What impressions do you have of Saul? As you see him starting off as king, and God chose him, and he starts off really good, and he's obedient to God, and God is with him, and things are going really well, and then things start to turn. And now we're at this point where Saul is just, he seems to be a head case. And he is paranoid, and he's anxious all the time, and he is so caught up in chasing after David that he is just consumed with David and his whereabouts. And I'm just curious, what do you think? Some of you have told me, I don't think I've ever read through or thought about this, thought about Saul's life as much as we have here, and it's been eye-opening for me. So there might be others of you that feel that way. So what are your impressions? What do you think about Saul? Jake?
I go to the very first introduction we have of him in the field, and he's got many workers. His fields are plentiful. He's successful. Everybody, the town speaks very highly of him. He's great stature, good looking, whatever it says. It seems like nothing could go wrong for him. And then shortly into his kingship, he was very devout, very loving and obeying to God. But shortly into his kingship, he still has that same mindset of, I'm giving God the glory, but he doesn't fully obey God's command. God criticizes him for that. God holds him accountable. And to me, it's just like, man, what a small misstep. But that's the start of everything else to come. This is a guy that seemingly has been in a very positive and successful position for a while. And he still thinks he's doing the right thing, but he's getting further and further from the grace of God. And it's tragic to see that go on. I didn't really realize that before, like you just said. I never really realized that as I went through this. And it makes the story even sadder.
So way back in chapter 13, what seems like an initial small departure, he offers this sacrifice that he was not authorized to give. Well, compared to where he is now, we might look at chapter 13 and think, man, that was such a small matter, relatively speaking, right? Obviously, it wasn't a small matter. Samuel made that clear. It was a big deal, but it seems like a smaller thing. All he did was offer this sacrifice, right? That's all it was. Now he is so far from that. Okay, good. All right, what else? Alan?
It seems like the events surrounding the destruction of the Amalekites was a real turning point. When Saul failed to do that, Samuel told him, you have not obeyed God. And when Saul tried to detain him and tore Samuel's robe, Samuel said, God has rejected you also. He has torn you out of the kingdom. And I think it's in passages that follow that, where Saul is talking to Samuel on a couple of occasions, and he talks about Samuel, pray to your God. Your God. He's not Saul's God also.
Right.
It's almost like, well, God has rejected me, so I'm going to reject him.
Okay.
Perhaps.
Okay. Good. Lance?
It's honestly scary to see how far Saul's departed from God, because he knows that the Lord is with David, but in chapter 23, he's like, oh, God has delivered David in my hand. He went from being a goodly person who people favored to being this person devoured by jealousy and obsession. And
Okay, good. Good. This is really good. Yes?
It just shows like his heart was never transformed. Even when he was convicted in moments, it wasn't really a true transformation on the part.
Yeah, okay, good.
I had a random thought. I think it's a good representation of what it can be like when you don't have the Lord next to you or you're following him correctly as he's supposed to be.
Saul has become completely self-absorbed, right? Would you agree with that? That he is focused on, well, I'm losing control. The kingdom is being taken away from me, and it's all because of this other guy, David. And he's just so focused on himself, he's not even thinking about the things that God has told him to do and the ways that God would be with him if he would just do what God says, right? Matt?
I think you could sort of make some arguments about David, and then David later in life, and Solomon, and Solomon later in life. Saul seems to be broken of mind, right? He's apart from God and broken in some way.
Yes.
Well, David definitely had his times of being broken, but not without God. Meaning he repented and came back to God, and then he war with his children, right? He was bad, and then Solomon clearly made a big departure, wisest man ever, basically from God, and yet didn't maintain as they aged. And I don't know necessarily why, but definitely better to be. If you're going to be broken with God, not broken without God, because you see it in Saul so drastically how twisted he became.
Oh, that's good. And I think we can tie all these three comments together about the heart that David possessed was completely different from the heart that Saul possessed. And I think you could possibly even argue that even at the beginning, when Saul was obedient and he was doing the things that God said, maybe even then he still didn't have the kind of heart that David is going to display. I mean, maybe Saul is just, well, this is what Samuel told me to do, so I'm going to do it. And I know the text doesn't say that explicitly, but when you see Saul's behavior in the chapters that follow, after things start to derail, right? I mean, Saul doesn't go from things are going well to where he is now in one step, right? There was an initial step where he starts to turn away from God. He could have turned it back. Right? I mean, that's what Samuel comes and tells him. Hey, course correct here. Let's go back. Now, it's just too late. Yeah, it's snowballed. That's right. That's a good word for it. Yes, that's good. Okay, Todd and then Wayne, and then we're going to get into tonight's material.
Well, I always, with Saul, go back to the very beginning. When you read the description of him and how he was described, head and shoulders above the crowd and all of that, why was he chosen to be king? God never jumped on that bandwagon, but he gave them a king because they wanted a king. They wanted to be a king to be like everybody else. So he gave them what they wanted from the beginning.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Good. Wayne?
That's what troubles me is when it says God changed his heart. And then I'm like, well, if God changed his heart, then what happened? And, could God not keep him? I mean, that troubles me.
Yeah. Well, okay, so real quick. When we got to that passage that says, and the Lord changed his heart, I offered another explanation of that, which was some things that had happened leading up to that. Saul was pretty modest of himself at the time. Who am I? I'm from the smallest tribe, and my family is so small. Why should I be the king? There were some things that God did for Saul leading up to that I think would have boosted Saul's confidence. Hey, maybe God really does want me to be king, and God is going to help me. And so I argued that maybe God changing his heart in the sense of God giving him a confidence boost that he needs, that yes, I will be with you, I will help you. It wasn't so much that God took him from having an evil heart and giving him a good heart, if that makes sense. But even if it is the other, that God gives him a good heart, the lesson for us then is I still have a choice in my life, right? So even if there's a person whose heart does soften and they become a Christian or they are serving the Lord, well, that doesn't mean that it's forever, right? They could still make a choice to go their own way, and I think Saul is doing just that. Wayne?
Saul, who did not want to be king at the start,
Yeah, the reluctance, right?
has now become what the people were be.
Oh, that's good.
Or that a king would become. He obviously is very fearful that David is going to come and take over, so for that reason he hates David. He's very jealous of the fact that the people love David and
Right.
trying to put an end to it.
Yeah, yeah. Is Saul acting in any way different from the kings of other nations, you think? Nope. No, he's acting just like a Moabite king would, or an Edomite king would, or an Ammonite, or any other king, right? He is focused on himself rather than focusing on the things that God wants him to do in God's kingdom, right? Okay, so in chapter 23, the Ziphites, the people who live in Ziph, which is right here. There's a red circle here. You may not be able to see it, but Ziph is right here west of the Dead Sea. And the Ziphites come up to Gibeah, which is just outside the circle there to the north. Gibeah is Saul's kind of home base. A lot of times we interact with Saul in the book, and that's where he is. So the Ziphites come to Gibeah and they say, hey, we know where David is. So why don't you come down here and we will turn David over to you. And so Saul, I'm skipping over some things. We're not going to read much here. But Saul gets some assurances from them. Are you sure that are you certain that it's David? Why don't you go back and find him and tell me later, come back and tell me his exact location. And then I will come and I will find him. So in verse 24, they arose and went to Ziph before Saul. Now David and his men were in the wilderness of Maon in the Arabah of the south, or to the south of Jeshimon. And when Saul and his men went to seek him, they told David, and he came down to the rock and stayed in the wilderness of Maon. And when Saul heard it, he pursued David in the wilderness of Maon. Saul went on one side of the mountain, and David and his men on the other side of the mountain. David was hurrying to get away from Saul, for Saul and his men were surrounding David and his men. Okay, now, Saul has 3,000 men at his disposal. David has the same 600 men that are with him, and they are separated by the space of a mountain. Saul's on one side and David is on the other. But while Saul is pursuing David in this wilderness, he's going to get word that the Philistines are moving in. And Saul is going to have to break off his pursuit of David in order to go back and take care of the Philistine threat. We've got some pictures here that I want you to see where David is and where Saul is pursuing him. This is the terrain where they are, the wilderness of Maon, or the desert of Maon. And you look at that and you think, I don't think I want a vacation there. And you don't, okay? It's called the desert. It's a wilderness because there is not much that is out there. But while Saul is closing in on David, you got to think about how scared David is going to be. When you look at this terrain where David is, what dangers is David facing aside from the obvious danger of King Saul is chasing after him with 3,000 soldiers? Water. It's probably hot. I don't know what time of year this is taking place. Maybe it isn't. But David is exposed to the elements here, and he is going to be struggling to find water and food. And so there's a lot of things that are working against David, okay? If you get a letter in the mail from the IRS, are you worried about that? I mean, obviously it depends on what it says, but if it says something like, hey, you're being audited, are you worried about that? Yeah. And you're reading that in the comfort of your living room, sitting in the air conditioning with a glass of sweet tea. How much more when the king is chasing you in the desert and he's going to kill you as soon as he finds you, right? This is a huge thing. So, God, of course, is going to providentially take care of David. And I think he does that by having Saul break off his pursuit because the Philistines are coming to try to take advantage of Saul being distracted. You think that's a part of their calculation? Right? Saul is just so focused on David that he's not giving much thought to the rest of the kingdom. And the Philistines are going to seize that opportunity. So Saul is going to care for David as Saul has to break off his pursuit. Now, at the end of chapter 23, in verse 24, it says, David went up from there and he stayed in the strongholds of En-gedi. All right. While David has been out in the wilderness and in the desert of Maon, now he comes to En-gedi, which is a place that is completely different. En-gedi is an oasis in the midst of this wilderness. You know, Joe and I were talking about this earlier, and he said something that I think is right. There's a lot of places that, you know, if you were to go to Israel today or go to biblical locations today, the tour guides will take you to this place or that place, and they'll say, well, you know, this might be where David did such and such. And there's a lot of places where we know that we're in the general area, but we don't know precisely where biblical events took place. But there's also a lot of places that we do know are the precise locations. One other example, in John chapter 4, you remember when Jesus went to Jacob's well in Sychar? You can go to that well today, and you can see it. It is right there. We know for certain that's it. Okay? There are some places in the scripture like that, and this is one of them. Josephus, the first century Jewish historian, he talked about En-gedi, and he praised it for its palm trees and just the beauty there, and there are springs of water there, fresh water there, and it has a very favorable year-round climate. And so this is the kind of place you want to go on vacation. Okay? Not the wilderness of Maon, but you want to go to En-gedi. Now, if you look at this picture on the bottom, down here, you can see some greenery there from your seat. You can't tell what that is, but that is a palm plantation. And you could go there and see those palm trees that are planted in just perfectly straight rows. Okay, clearly David didn't see that, right? He didn't go and see this palm tree plantation with these trees all in a row like that. But why did they put the plantation where it is? Because it would grow. Okay, this was a good location to put this palm tree farm. So, the Hebrew, the prefix en, en, in the name En-gedi, the idea of the noun is the idea of an eye or a fountain or a spring. Okay, and so this is the spring of Gedi, and we'll see on the next slide what Gedi means. But you see En-gedi right here, just on the western coast of the Dead Sea. Kind of interesting that you have the Dead Sea, in which there is no life at all, and then right next to it you have this oasis of life where there's fresh water. If you look at this picture here, you see this greenery here? That's En-gedi. That's where we're talking about. Now, what surrounds it? Desert, wilderness, right? It literally is this oasis in the middle of the wilderness. But this is where David is now going for refuge. A couple more pictures. I mentioned the word Gedi in En-gedi. The noun Gedi describes a young animal, but mostly one that was either just slaughtered or soon to be slaughtered. So this is the spring of the soon-to-be dead animal. Now, listen, I have no idea why it's called that. I'm sure that there's some explanation in the Hebrew that, explains where that came from. I don't know. But that's what the two names combined, the compound word would be the nearest equivalent for us. But if you look at these two pictures, you'll see that among these hills and rocks that there are some trails that go up into these areas. And some of these places are pretty steep, and you'd really have to work hard to hike up some of these areas. But then there are some others that you can climb through a little bit more easily. And what do you see right there? You see a big black hole, right? Which in this kind of terrain is going to be a cave. There's hundreds and thousands of caves in these rocks. And Joe can tell you more about that. He and Sandra went to Israel years ago, and they hiked in some of these trails and looked in some of these caves. In fact, Joe even told me he went in to cover his feet in one of them. Not sure anybody read chapter 24. Okay, so the spring of Gedi. Okay, you see this waterfall here, this fresh water. It makes you wonder if, while David is hiding, did he go to this spring and get a drink of water? Did he go there and wash his face and refresh himself? I think the odds are very good that he did just that. Okay? All right. Now, chapter 24, verse 1. When Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, David is in the wilderness of En-Gedi. So Saul took 3,000 chosen men from Israel to seek David and his men in front of the rocks of the wild goats. Okay? Your Bible may capitalize those names there, capital R and W and G, which would tell you that this is a location. Okay? He came to the sheepfolds on the way where there was a cave, and Saul went in to relieve himself. Now David and his men were sitting in the inner recesses of the cave. Okay. Saul goes in to go to the bathroom. That's what we would say. But if you're a Bible translator, you can't say that. Why? Because you'll give the wrong impression to the reader. When you and I say, hey, I need to go to the bathroom. I need to go to the restroom. What our words suggest is there is an actual room that we're going to that has indoor plumbing in it, right? So if you think about somebody who's maybe from a different culture, they're going to read, Saul went to the bathroom. They're going to say, wait a minute, there was a room inside this cave where there was a toilet, right? So as a translator, you have to choose your words carefully, and you have to figure out the best way to say this. So tell me, what do your translations say? Attend to his needs, okay? Cover his feet. What? What is that about? What does that mean? All right, we'll come back to that in a second. Anybody's Bible say something different? Wayne? Relieve himself, okay. All right. There are some more modern paraphrasing translations, a little looser translations, that will say something like, he went to answer the call of nature, one of them says. Okay? All right. All of those ideas, we get it. But the Hebrew words here say he covered his feet. Well, that's kind of strange. What does that mean? What is Saul wearing? You remember? What does David cut off a piece of in just a few verses?
Saul's robe.
All right, he cuts off a corner of Saul's robe. Saul has a robe on. Okay, probably a long robe that reaches down to his ankles. And if Saul goes into, I'm sorry to be crass, but let's say go number 2, what is that robe going to do to his feet? Cover his feet. That's where it comes from. He's going to squat down and the robe's going to cover his feet. Okay? All right. So Saul's got to go to the bathroom. So he goes into this cave, and it just so happens to be the cave where David and his fellow soldiers are hiding. Part of me reads this and thinks, what are the odds? Right? I mean, I said a moment ago, there are hundreds of caves in this area. Maybe more than that. Is it Minnesota that's the land of 1,000 lakes? Right? This is the land of 1,000 caves. Okay? What are the odds? Now, is there a part of you that, and Joe and I talked about this earlier too, is there a part of you that reads this and, Saul's chasing after David, but he couldn't get it? Next chapter. Saul's still chasing after David, and he can't find him. Next chapter. Saul's still chasing after David. Is there a part of you that reads that and thinks, Saul's just not very good at tracking people? Right? Why can't he find him? How hard is it? Israel's not that big. This land is not all that big. Why is it so hard to find David? I don't know if you've thought about that. But when you see the terrain and you know about all the caves, now you probably have a better understanding of why Saul is having such a hard time tracking David. Okay? All right, Christine and then Wayne.
But it's not just Saul is tracking David. It's 3,000 men.
Yeah, right. Tracking 600. Right.
Right. So you're saying 600 men fit into a cave?
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure that the text says that. It's possible. I think there's obviously David and some of his men there because they're in the cave saying, hey, now's your chance. There's clearly some of them in there. I don't know that it's all of them. Wayne?
My suspicion would be that the caves there, and I've never been to Israel, so I don't know. My suspicion would be that the caves are multiple caves that are interconnected up in the reaches of the mountain. In other words, it's not a cave that goes into some dead-end spot. And
Could be.
David and his 600 men, if you will,
Right.
got trapped into that cave. Their footprints would have surely been visible at some point. So I'm thinking it was interconnected caves where Saul and his men went in one way and David and his went in another.
I don't know. Possibly. I can't speak to that. I'm not much of a spelunker, right? And in fact, I really want nothing to do with that. I've done a little bit of that, and I don't enjoy that. All right. Now, let's look at verse 4. The men of David said to him, "Behold, this is the day of which the Lord said to you, Behold, I am to give your enemy into your hand, and you shall do to him as it seems good to you." So David arose and cut off the edge of Saul's robe secretly. And it came about afterward that David's conscience bothered him because he had cut off the edge of Saul's robe. David sneaks up to Saul, I take it in the cover of great darkness, and his men are saying, "Now's your chance. Kill him. He's trying to kill you. If he finds you, you're dead. Kill him." But David refuses to do that, and instead he just cuts off some of Saul's robe. Now, he says why he refuses to do it in verse 6. Because this is the Lord's anointed. God chose this man. And I know that he's pursuing me and he wants to kill me, but God chose him. And so I'm not going to kill the man whom God chose. Now, David's men were probably not very happy with that or very convinced by that, but it does say in verse 7 that he persuaded his men and did not allow them to rise up against Saul. It doesn't say that they understood it, but David is the leader, and he says, no, we're not going to do this. Now, this picture, obviously this is just an artist's depiction, so it's not like, one of David's soldiers pulled out his iPhone and, turned the flash on and took a picture. I struggle with this story a little bit. Do we have to assume that Saul was wearing the robe that David cut? I mean, think about it. Did Saul not hear anything? Did Saul really have no idea that somebody was right beside him? I mean, I know it's dark, but there's been times when I've been dead asleep in the middle of the night and I wake up to a 5-year-old staring at me, this far from my face, and I kind of knew she was there, right? You have a sense about that kind of thing. I don't know. And understand, I'm not trying to cast doubt or anything. I'm not denying the scripture says he cut off Saul's robe. And it is hard for me to imagine this scene unfolding. That's all I'm telling you. I believe it with all my heart that it did. It's just hard for me to imagine that this is happening in this way. But what do you notice Saul is doing in the picture? He's sleeping. Okay, well, if he is sleeping, then it's much more easily explained, I think, that David could actually do this. But does the text say he was asleep? The text just says he went in to go to the bathroom. So, I don't know. Maybe he did. Maybe he went in, relieved himself, and then he said, it's cool, it's dark, I'm a little tired, I'm going to take a nap. Maybe that's exactly what happened. I just don't know for certain.
Well,
Arlene?
David and his men were inside the
Wait your turn. Arlene had her hand up first. Come right back to you.
But this is God's providence, too.
Clearly, no doubt about that. Yeah. Yeah, and Arlene said this was God's providence working. There's no doubt about that. Wayne, go ahead.
Well, you have to think, David and his men were inside the cave. They went in probably also to get out of the sun, to rest, the same purpose.
Absolutely possible. Yes.
Now, I'll say one other thing. It's usually pitch black, dark inside
Right.
those caves.
Yep.
So if there's anybody in there, they're probably carrying some kind of a candle, which in this case could not have possibly been. But I don't know.
Yeah.
God's providence
Yep.
worked here.
No, I'm with you. I get it. Months ago, we were in New Mexico in Carlsbad Caverns, and there's some places deep down in those caves where it is really, really dark, like can't see your hand in front of your face dark. And I just knew that there were bats swirling all around my head. There wasn't a single bat in the caves at that time of year. They all fly to Mexico for the winter, and there wasn't in it. But I just knew there's one in there. You're right. I was psyching myself out. I was a little paranoid. Like Saul, I had a spear in my hand. I was ready to slay a bat. Matt?
David's conviction about not killing the Lord's anointed, I mean, I know we'll get further in the next
Very commendable.
the next book, but it's real. How could you kill the Lord's anointed? But this conviction he has is it's amazing.
Yes, it is. Absolutely. All right. Now, David has cut off the corner of Saul's robe because, as we said, he refuses to kill God's anointed. And when Saul leaves the cave, David is going to come out behind him and let him know, hey, I just had you in my hands. You were delivered into my hands. I could have done to you whatever I wanted, and I did not hurt you. So in chapter 24 and verse 9, David says to Saul, why do you listen to the words of men, saying to you, behold, David seeks to harm you? This day your eyes have seen that the Lord had given you into my hand in the cave, and some told me to kill you. But my eye had pity on you, and I said, I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed. Now, my father, see. My father? Why is he calling him that?
Son-in-law.
Respect, he's king, and don't forget, he's married to Saul's daughter. Right?
If you go back up to verse 5, it says that he was somewhat stricken because he had done something to his master. He was, if you will, somewhat respectful of
Yes.
Saul was king.
Verse 11. The edge of your robe is in my hand. For in that I cut off the edge of your robe and did not kill you, know and perceive that there is no evil or rebellion in my hands. And I have not sinned against you, though you are lying in wait for my life to take it. May the Lord judge between you and me, and may the Lord avenge me on you, but my hand shall not be against you. I love verse 14, where David asks him, whom are you pursuing? A dead dog, a single flea? I'm just one person. And I'm a small person at that. Now, we might argue that. I don't know, David, you're a pretty big flea. I mean, you're about to be the king, right? Okay, but his point is, I'm just one person. And you've given you and thousands of your soldiers over to chasing me down and killing me. Why are you doing this? I seek no harm upon you. Then, when David finished speaking, verse 16, Saul said, is that your voice, my son David? And Saul lifted up his voice and wept, and he said to David, you are more righteous than I, for you have dealt well with me, while I have dealt wickedly with you. Now, Saul is going to continue on and say that he recognizes that David is honorable and upright. He says in verse 19, if a man finds his enemy, will he let him go away safely? His point being, but that's exactly what you have done. May the Lord therefore reward you with good in return for what you have done to me this day. Now behold, I know that you will surely be king, and the kingdom of Israel will be established in your hand. So now swear to me by the Lord that you will not cut off my descendants after me, and that you will not destroy my name from my father's household. So David swore to Saul, and Saul went to his home, but David and his men went up to the stronghold. Matt, verse 21 gets back to what you were talking about earlier, where in later chapters, David's going to become very upset with those who do harm the house of Saul, right? And when Saul dies, how could you kill the Lord's anointed? And I think verse 21 has something to do with it. I made a promise to Saul that I would not hurt his house. I think that's part of it, okay? All right. Saul, at least for a brief time, recognizes how insane he's been. He recognizes how foolish he has been. And he knows that David is right. David has not done the things that Saul thinks he has done. Okay? And so he has a moment of clarity where, with all that we've read about Saul hunting him down, isn't there a part of you that thinks, why didn't Saul just arrest him right then? He knows where he is. Why doesn't he send his troops? Hey, David's right there. Go get him. But he does have this moment of clarity. Now, it doesn't last. It's just a moment of clarity, but he does have it. All right. Let me hear your thoughts. What else you got? Lance.
I have to think that like God had Saul go into that cave. Out of all he was going to look to was that cave. And even though there's no direct comment from God about this, I like to think about it.
No, I think you're right.
I mean, like, this is my man. Like, David's been said, like, here's your enemy, you can kill him. You got the perfect opportunity, and David wouldn't do it because it felt wrong to him.
Yeah.
All the hurt Saul had inflicted on him, he still forgave him.
I think you're right. So back in chapter 15, Alan, you mentioned this at the beginning of class. Saul tries to detain Samuel by grabbing his garment, and the robe rips in Saul's hand. And then Samuel uses that like any good preacher would. He capitalizes on the illustration, and he says, just like that, the kingdom is going to be taken away from you. Okay? Do you see some irony or maybe a parallel in what David has just done to Saul? Cutting off the corner of his what? His royal garment. Right? This is the king we're talking about. Not everybody wears a robe like the king does. But David cuts off the corner of his robe. And in a sense, there's this hearkening back to that moment with Samuel, I think. I'm not saying the scripture is making that connection. I'm making that connection. It makes me think back to that. And Saul is seeing yet again the robe being torn. The kingdom is being taken away from him, like Samuel said back in 15. Kyle?
I have a question. So verse 22.
Only comments, no questions. What you got?
So verse 22 says, Saul went to his home, and David and his men went up to the stronghold. So David is now, like, Saul no longer pursuing him. What does it mean there when it says he went up to the stronghold?
The stronghold. Okay, that's a good question. And I'm going to delay until the second bell rings. No, I'm just kidding. Okay, so you see the word stronghold several times in 1 Samuel. Earlier, you remember when David took his family, his parents, to Moab, and there was a stronghold there where his family was staying for safety. Okay? Then he leaves there. The prophet tells him to leave there and go back into Judah. And when he comes into Judah, he goes into another stronghold. The stronghold is probably just another reference for a cave or another naturally made hiding out location. Okay? Where it's not necessarily a specific place. And I think in the book, the Waldron book, there's even a paragraph in there about it's probably not a man-made fortification in the way that we would naturally use the word stronghold. Okay? All right. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. We'll pick up Sunday.